When life throws you a curveball, how are you going to handle adversity? Welcome to the Fearless Mindset Podcast, where you're about to go on a journey as I interview security, business, and entertainment leaders on what it takes to stay fearless. I'm your host, Mark Ledlow, and enjoy today's episode. Hello, everyone. This is Mark Ledlow, the host of the Fearless Mindset Podcast, brought to you by Ledlow Security Group. Used to be headquartered in Oregon, Grants Pass, Oregon, but we have now set up our global headquarters in Frisco, Texas, and a lot of things happening this season. I make a couple announcements. We just hit 100,000 subscribers on YouTube as of yesterday, and wow, never expected that. But thanks for tuning in. Thanks for supporting the show. This is a non-sponsored show. The reason why? Because then we can have a free conversation, right? And keep it independent. But today we have a different type of guest, thought leadership and wild leaders. He's a doctor. Dr. Rob McKenna comes to us from the Seattle metro area. Thanks for coming on, Rob. Good to see you. Looks like you're in a comfortable workout t-shirt today.
I am, Mark. I'm most comfortable in a black t-shirt. People make fun of me for it. So yeah.
Ron Warman speaks highly of you up there in Bellevue. Ron Warman's a great leadership guy. Offers the industry quite a lot of wisdom, and the way he thinks is just off the chart times 10. And I'm glad he gave us an intro, and glad to have you on the show finally after my 8-month little break. Even though the show was self-automated, I'm back in the seat, trying to do what we can to make an impact in all the young professional minds in the podcast world.
Yeah, that is good stuff. My intro to Ron Warman, it wasn't my intro, but my intro to the security industry into part of your world, I know where you function, is Ron invited me to the great conversation right before the pandemic. And so it was my last flight was to Florida. And I didn't have a lot of deep connections into the physical security industry. Like I didn't. I had cybersecurity connections. And so I took a red eye, got off the plane. And I was learning just so much on turbo, just getting to know some people. Mm-hmm. Sat in the back with Brian Cook. I don't know if you know Brian also. And I know
that name. Yep.
He was giving me a deep education before I actually went on the stage to talk about the security of security leaders.
Mm-hmm.
And it was an awesome moment. And just opened up so many common friendships. Friendships into the sheepdogs of the world. It was a pretty important moment for me.
Sheepdog. That's a good way to explain it.
Yeah.
Sheepdogs.
Yeah. Yeah. One of your colleagues, that I don't know if you know him or not, but he was on our podcast, and that's what he said. He said, Rob, there are sheep and there are sheepdogs.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason that you relate to me and all my friends is because you have a lot of sheepdog in you. So anyway, it was, so I've made some great friendships, and looking forward to this conversation too.
Absolutely. After, the experience with the elections and Joe Rogan and the podcast world, I'm like, it dawned on me how powerful podcasting really is. And that the young people truly get their information on podcasts. They just don't trust network media news anymore.
Yeah.
And I'm like, whoa. And then I think after the election, I'm apolitical, folks, listening to this. I served in the Marine Corps under Bill Clinton. I was willing to give my life as a sacrifice to your freedom. So that's where I stand politically. I'm a Marine. So I love my country. But sometimes we just don't agree with whoever's in office. Sometimes that's how it goes. But the reason why I'm saying that is this is a independent podcast, and I bring folks in like Rob who may have different opinion, and that's the great thing about podcasting, learning how to think critically. And that's why we need to learn what we don't know.
Yeah, that's absolutely true.
And so,
you
in the audience listening to this, Rob is a doctor, obviously. You can PhD in probably psychology. Is that an assumption correctly? Okay.
Yeah. And I got my start into this work. I was through my 30s had an opportunity to be a part of several different longitudinal studies of leaders, and you were talking about this current moment that we're in. And so I had this, you know how you have these shaping experiences that really change the trajectory of everything that you do. And so I got invited into these multiple studies where longitudinal meaning like we study these leaders' journey over time. And so one of the studies we were part of was actually a 6.5-year study. We followed 120 leaders for 6.5 years, and looking at all kinds of things related to their development and their effectiveness. And one thing that you can't help but see as soon as you enter into a process like that, where you're following these folks, and the company that actually blessed and funded this study was in aerospace.
Whoa.
And they also agreed to follow those leaders if they left the business. And so we had this incredible database. But what you can't help but notice when you follow people over time and you start to think about effectiveness is you develop a much more comprehensive picture of what it means to develop a person. And that it's not just one thing. It's not just what they're good at, their competence and their strength. It's not just their purpose.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just whether or not they have support. It's not just whether or not they're learning from their experiences and have a growth mindset. It's a combination of all of those things. And so it got me deeply interested in what it means to develop whole leaders. The WILD stands for Whole and Intentional Leader Development. That's the acronym.
Oh.
And I like it. There's two reasons, right, Mark? One is that the developmental story of every person is a wild story. You know what I mean? It has it has surprising turns. It has all kinds of things. And so, but it also, the acronym is Whole and Intentional Leader Development. So everything that we've been focusing on is preparing for these moments by making an investment in developing whole leaders, and using a process as opposed to a one-off solution to do that. And so when we're facing these kinds of moments, I think it always calls out, every moment, right, calls out this need for us to be really intentional about developing leadership capacity around us. So it's that's a little bit of the backstory.
Got it.
Yeah.
Well, here's something that really gnaws at my heart to want to help this young generation. The young generations, they're just beat up by our generation. They're just beat up. They're lazy. They're on their phone. They're texting each other. What is wrong with them? What the heck is their deal? All they do is, smoke pot and drink and live in their mom and dad's basement, which I highly doubt. I think a lot of them have a lot of self-worth. They want to be independent and do their own thing, but they're just beat up. And what kind of advice can you offer that generation that you've seen through your coaching business to really give them some hope, give them flick that light on for them and say, hey guys, girls, the world is not hopeless. There is opportunity. There is a huge future for you. Yeah. And I'm hearing from a lot of different people, they're kind of down and out and depressed, and they kind of given up. And what are you hearing from your circles?
Well, it's funny. So I first of all, I would probably start off by speaking to the people who might box them in too much.
Absolutely.
As opposed to speaking to them. And it's I think there's some surprising things generationally, and there's a big question about whether or not the things that we see or we perceive are generational differences, or if they're just differences in stages of the lifespan, if that makes sense. So there's a difference. So some people want to label generations, but there's also the reality that some of it's just the common adult development stages, if that makes sense. So like there's an incredible base of psychology that would say some of the things we see are not generational. They're just what people go through as they grow up. And I say that because there's a couple of things. We just one of the pivots, I don't know if I like that word or not, but in our business model was we went out and we did a study of all the organizations that we had served and our attempts to develop whole leader capacity. So I built a SaaS system and a process and a set of assessments that organizations were using as their system for developing people. And I'll get to your point about this generation. And one of the things we found was that one of the biggest things that was changing as people were developing a deeper understanding of themselves, their competence, their purpose, all kinds of things, that as they shared that together, the most important factor that was changing in them was they were starting to trust each other.
Wow.
So trust became a very big theme for Wild Leaders, and it's actually our brand promise now. Is leadership equals trust. Now you can measure it, and now you can build it. And so I come back to your statement and comment, because we did a little bit. We're publishing. We've been doing research through what's called the Wild Trust Index. It's an index, a 33 question index that we created to measure trust at the personal, team, and organizational levels. And so we're publishing our State of Trust report on March 1st. So it's coming up pretty soon. And here's why I come back around to that: is we did a little bit of a look at some of the age differences on trust. So looking at how do people perceive trust in their 20s, and then in the early 30s, and then in that the mid gap, like let's say through your 40s and 50s, and then in your 60s and even your 70s.
Right.
And what's fascinating, Mark, is this: because the narrative out there is that 20 somethings are distrusting. Like that's a common narrative I hear, is that they don't trust leaders, they don't trust organizations, they don't have the same kind of necessarily loyalty that you and I may have had. Here's what's fascinating, Mark, in the data, and it is preliminary. So, but is what we found is that people in their 20s and their early 30s actually are higher on trust than people in their 40s and 50s.
Oh, okay.
And I think and it's fascinating, right? Because this assumption that we make that they're not trusting, because when they come in their 20s, here's my working theory around what the data is saying, is that they're fresh. Like they're looking for, they have high trust, and that what happens is they experience a little bit of life and a little bit of those bumps and bruises like you were describing, and then they start to question that trust a little bit. But what we also see is that later on in the lifespan, trust starts to increase again. Does that make sense? And so it's kind of interesting, like people on each end of the spectrum are actually share more in terms of trust in that middle category. And then the second thing I would say, Mark, is this, and I would say this to both those young people and to senior leaders who are trying to understand them, is to be deeply aware that and careful about putting people in generational boxes. And I think the reason why, and doesn't matter whether it's a young person or an older person, is that every person has a nuanced developmental story. They have their own story. Now, there are certain common things that we all share that we have to be working on, but the way that those things play together looks different for you than it looks for me. And so I think one of the things I would tell like those senior leaders is to say is be cautious of generational buckets. And then for those young people is to say, yeah, the fact that you feel like you've got a lot of nuance and some uniqueness to your story is absolutely important to pay attention to. And there are certain common factors that we all have to work on together, if that makes sense.
Makes total sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Like you said, they're going through maturity, you know. What you do in your 19s and your 20s, you're not doing in your 30s.
Right.
You're dating in your 20s, trying to figure out who you are, what you want to do. And then
Exactly.
boom, get through college. Okay, now you got to grow up a little bit. Go get a rental, a little studio, and your first job. And then you like to say, then the next decade is a new season of life.
Yeah.
At that age, maybe we beat them up so much, but we all went through that too.
Yeah. Absolutely.
That's
absolutely.
a great point.
Yeah.
And trust is such a pivotal part of life. Not even life, but just business. And I think, in the business world, I've asked, my team asked me, Mark, why didn't you close the deal? Why did you take so long? Like, guys, when that client trusts you, they make the phone call or the email. They're ready to roll. They got to get to know you first. And like, like you mentioned the younger generation, once they start trusting people around them and their profession, and then they get more responsibility.
Yeah.
It's just the same thing. But yeah,
Yep.
trust is so huge in our culture and our society.
Yeah. It's been interesting, as I've been speaking about trust, and then of course we're deep in this research phase right now. And the thing about trust that is so fascinating is almost no one will deny that it is the most important currency in the world.
Wow.
Like without it, nothing happens. Like without it, I don't even drive out of my driveway because I have to trust that strangers I don't know won't swerve into my side of the road. Like I can't walk into the local grocery store if I trust that I can go in and out of there safely. We don't
Right.
think about it until it's gone. And I know all of our brothers and sisters in the security industry understand this so well. But what is also fascinating, Mark, is that we treat trust like a feeling. And it is, but it's like this, it's a feeling that we know is important, but we don't really describe what it means to have it. And so it's one of the reasons that books that just are about trust is critical. We've got to build trust. Yes. But what I get really interested in is, so how do you build it? Because what we found is that trust has a chemistry. It has an actual makeup like oxygen.
Wow.
And so if you can begin, because you don't get trust by talking about trust, right? We know this already, and we can intuit that all day long. Like you don't get trust by telling, you don't get someone to trust you by telling them to trust you, by the way. So what we studied was the drivers. Like what are the things that an organization, that a team and an individual does that build trust? And so that's a powerful thing, because once you can start to identify those drivers, you can actually start to build it. And it's been phenomenal working with organizations, whether they're strongholds of trust or whether they're what we would describe as jungles of trust, because they're chaotic places where people are working, is that it does have a chemistry. And so if we can, once we figured out that chemistry, we started to get an idea of what levers can we pull specific to us that would increase the extent to which people trust each other here,
Wow. That was $1 million gold nugget for anybody going for their master's in business right there. That was the course right there. You just need yourself $100,000 at U of O or the Huskies University in Seattle. Forget the course. You just got Dr. Rob telling you the key to the business city.
You want me to keep going? I can't stop talking about it.
That was a bomb. That was a business bombshell, folks.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. But that's true. That's reality. That's what I tell my team all the time. Like I tell them, play the long game. Play the long game. The long game always wins. The instant hit, try and get in there, get a deal done. If the client trusts you and they really understand you have their true financial interest in mind, you're not trying to rip them off. They keep coming. They keep coming back.
Yeah. Absolutely.
But if they think you're trying to rip them off, it's over.
Absolutely. And it's fascinating too, our definition of trust. I love how you're describing it, because it is a relational thing. Like trust, it requires a relationship. It's when it gets really interesting, right? Is between a customer and you, or between a friend, or even with my wife. And what's fascinating about trust is that more often than not, it's questioned and not broken. So this has also been emerging from our research, because a lot of people talk about trust as if it's like we describe it like it's not a light switch. It's more like a dimmer switch, where you have varying degrees of it. And when people ask me, they say, or if they were to ask my wife and say, do you trust Rob? What I hope she would say is, in a big T sense, yes, I do. In a big T way. But if you want to get into the real story of our marriage, and I think every marriage, she probably would say, with what? You know what I mean? Because there's certain things that she wouldn't trust me with, where she would question her trust. And that doesn't make us mean our 27-year marriage is broken. It means that's the real story. And so I think the same is true of teams, of people who are working together, is that trust is more like a dimmer switch. It's like it's questioned in any healthy team, even on a daily basis.
Right.
You know what I mean? So we have to be able to speak truth to each other, to figure things out together when I'm like, hey, Mark didn't respond to my text I sent him. It was pretty important, or you know what I mean? Or to my email. And so why not? And so if we clarify why those things occur, then we start to trust each other more.
Easy, simple enough. And when we said the word teams, of course, my brain goes in military.
Totally.
Like a Marine Corps squad, Marine Corps platoon, Navy SEAL team, Delta Force team. And those guys are the most elite fighting forces in the world. But from day one, at their training, what do the instructors teach them trust your
Yeah.
teammate. They got your back. And it's ingrained to them at the highest level. Even for Michael Jordan to pull off 6 NBA titles,
Yeah.
they trusted each other. For Tom Brady to do what, 5 Super Bowl titles,
Yeah.
it's trust. It's,
It is. And you know what's funny is that this is the definition of trust, and this is where it gets fascinating. So if a commanding officer were talking about trust, it's like, so what does that mean? And here's what trust includes that gets a little complex, but I think it's the reality is that
mm-hmm,
it includes my integrity. So the extent to which I will do what you're asking me to do. You know what I mean?
mm-hmm,
And I can do that. It includes ability. So am I able to do what you're asking me to do? It's a key part of that. It includes my reliability. So am I consistent? So I do what you're asking me to do consistently, or is it oftentimes broken, right?
mm-hmm,
So that includes, but it also includes strength. So the extent to which I can either do something well and perform and be effective, or I can improve at it. So that's that strength part. And then the last thing that's so critical in that definition of trust is that I will tell you the truth if any of those things are lacking. So if my integrity, my ability, my reliability, or my strength, if I have problems in any of those areas, which all of us do,
mm-hmm.
right, that we're able to speak truthfully to each other about where we are on those different factors. And that's why for us, like a big part of our methodology is creating a way and a pathway for people to actually get a little bit more vulnerable together.
Mm.
Because like with no matter what team you're talking about in a military context or, in a tech firm,
Yeah.
it's like they have to be living up to those standards and then figuring it out together when they're not and why. And so it's been fascinating to break. And when I talk about the chemistry of trust, that's a piece of the way I would describe the chemistry. Is it's more than just saying we have to trust each other. Well, what does that mean? And then we can create conversations where we can improve in those certain areas. Like if I'm not doing well and performing well, and by the way, that's shown up as our one of our very top predictors of trust is whether or not you are simply performing in your job. Do you
Whoa.
know what I mean? It's like it makes sense.
It
If I
does.
get it done and I get
Right.
it done well,
Yeah.
then Mark's going to trust me more as the start.
Totally.
I can geek out on this stuff, Mark, all day long.
And my brain's going and example scenarios, being the host here, and I'm thinking, lately I've been hearing from a lot of colleagues in executive protection, which is for those who listen to the podcast don't know, that's basically your bodyguard. That's what we
Yeah.
call in the professional realm. And I'm hearing is there's a sense of lack of work ethic. The mindset is just not hungry. The mindset is lazy. They don't really care about what they're doing. They're just showing up to collect a paycheck per se. And so it's a lot of the young generation they're just getting beat up again by the other
Mm-hmm.
generation. And I'm like, well, maybe they don't have the experiences yet to know what they're doing because they haven't gone through the proper training, like, a military man or woman would go through, radio operator school to learn how to work a Prick 77 radio, which is what I did in the Marine Corps. And so maybe we're casting judgment as an older generation on this younger generation because maybe they need more training to be better. Maybe
Yeah.
they need, maybe we need to invest into those agents and say, hey, maybe these companies that have these contracts need to put these folks, men and women, into better training organizations and culture so they can have success. And but what I'm hearing is lately, it's just the work ethic out there. Just it's like cow poop in the pasture.
Yeah. Well, I think that again, that narrative is I know there is some reality probably in that.
Hmm.
Um, but where I think the burden of that lands is so it's not just any training, but it's actually getting better at the way that we have been doing development. That's the way I would
Development,
describe it. So
development.
moving from a training mindset when it comes to developing people capacity to a developmental mindset that would say, because nobody really wants to be gotten to do anything. You know
Uh,
what I'm saying? They don't,
okay.
no one's motivated by that. No one ever was. Now, people may have had a little bit more of a loyalty to larger systems and their government and so on, or maybe to organizations and maybe less assumptions. But what we found is that people are developmentally ready. Like they have a capacity. I can't tell you story after story, Mark, of people who have been the biggest naysayers on teams that we've worked with, whether it's senior leaders or new leaders.
Mm-hmm.
People that are like, I don't get it. I don't know what this means for my organization to make an investment in me. And then eventually you watch those people turn the corner and become the most high capacity people you've ever seen. It's all the developmental capacities there. And maybe we should do a better job of actually making that investment, as opposed to the thought of we need to get people trained. That's one of the biggest mind shifts that I've tried to encourage in every person I know in the whole learning, training, and development area is nobody wants to be gotten to do anything. Let's create a better invitation for them to be seen. But also, here's the other thing, Mark, is that we also need to have, sometimes I think we've gotten a little bit soft on clear expectations.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So one of the biggest factors driving trust is whether or not people have job clarity. And it's very difficult because the other thing you hear is I want these young people to be accountable for their work, right?
No, I
But
hear
they
that a
can't,
lot.
but it's impossible to be accountable for a job that hasn't been clear.
Wow. Good point.
So
Yeah.
that's why
Yeah.
you know what I'm saying? Like, and
Yeah.
that's on us to provide.
Yeah.
We need to provide clarity and truth and speak directly as well as care about them. So it's like
Right.
this over pivot toward empathy is a little, it's not just empathy. It takes more than empathy,
Mm-hmm.
you know what I mean, to make an organization spin. It takes clarity, true, and truth speaking also. So yeah, anyway, I think that I hope people feel encouraged by those comments. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just a shift we're going through our work culture as we, see. And I hear too from as I was growing up in the workforce, a lot of mom and dads both worked. So you have this what they call them the double income kids.
Yeah.
And that was a very prevalent in the tech sector in Seattle and LA and Silicon Valley. You had these kids and mom and dad both worked. So they're at
Yeah.
home. And so now you're seeing those kids in the workforce. And
Yeah.
so they constantly, and they beat them up all the time. And
Yeah.
I'm like, and then now our generation, my generation is starting to phase out, you know. They're going to be wanting to retire or do something else because they're worn out because they've been working like a dog. And then I hear the value system of this young generation is they don't see the value in working that hard. They just don't get it. They'd rather go play video games than just chill and they don't want this. They don't want mom and dad's stress of life in their life. I'm hearing
Yeah.
that as well. So there's
Yeah.
I think a lot of conversations that could focus to help this young generation to figure their stuff out. And like you
Yeah.
said, they do figure those stuff out. They just haven't got that life cycle yet.
Yeah. And what if these are big questions,
Okay, sure.
but and I'm always, like I said, I always want to be really thoughtful when I talk about generational differences, because when people say like they're just like this, it's like I don't know if that's true or not. I don't know if the evidence would support that. But where I feel the burden is as an organizational leader and a person who hires young people as well as more seasoned people, is what am I doing to provide clarity around what their job is and clear expectations for what performance looks like, as well as investing deeply in who they are as human beings. And and Mark, that is the oldest story in leadership research. If you look at, there is nearly 100 years of evidence that leadership comes down to two things. And there are more things that are a part of these two things. But if you look at the literally decades after decades of research, the two factors that have remained true to this day are the importance of clear operational systems and also people investment systems. Like you have to, like, that's what every organization is facing, right? Is like,
Yeah.
how do I get it done? How do I achieve my missional goals? You know what I mean? How do I have a clear operational and job clarification and descriptions, performance management systems, all the task structures to get our work done together, our missional objectives. And at the very same time, what we've failed to do is do that. And at the same time, make an investment in the flesh and blood, the human beings who are going to use those systems.
Wow.
And so
Sure.
it's like, such a fundamental truth. If you listen to any leadership expert out there who's written a book, here's the challenge. The smart ones will focus on those two things.
Mm-hmm.
In some cases, you'll see an over pivot toward one or the other.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? It's like our operational goals, or let's just care about people. And we know that to build trust, you got to do both.
Absolutely.
And so I put the burden on those leaders to say, are we doing both, whether it's those younger people or those older people, and inviting them into an organization where they can achieve it all with, together. And also, of course, be willing to edit. You know what I mean? They have to, if
sure.
they got to be willing to come in and change also, just like I do.